The wind tore through the desolate expanse of Argos, an unrelenting force that stripped life from everything it touched. Lara stumbled forward, her legs sinking into the unforgiving snow with every step. The thin cloak draped over her shoulders was a pitiful shield against the frigid cold, her blue skin now marred with patches of frostbite. Each breath she drew stung her lungs, the icy air a cruel reminder that she was still alive, if barely. She stopped to steady herself, her gaze lifting to the distant horizon where the evacuation ships had vanished days ago. A faint shimmer of light lingered in the sky like ghosts mocking her. Her hands curled into trembling fists as the memory clawed at her, her people leaving her behind, their eyes avoiding hers as they boarded the vessels. "She's too weak," they had whispered. "A genetic anomaly. She won't survive the journey. Better she stays, disposable, forgotten. 16 cycles old, and already abandoned to die on a planet that had become a frozen wasteland." The first shudder of nightfall crept over the landscape, the temperature plunging further into lethal depths. Lara's body begged her to stop, but the instinct to survive pushed her forward. Through her blurring vision, she spotted a jagged opening in the rocky cliffs, a cave, its mouth dark and unwelcoming but promising shelter. She stumbled toward it, each step a battle against her faltering strength. Inside, the wind's roar was muffled, replaced by a heavy silence. The rocky walls radiated a cold of their own, but it was better than the open wasteland. Lara collapsed onto the uneven floor, her chest heaving as she tried to steady her breath. She curled into herself, clutching her knees to her chest in a futile attempt to preserve what little warmth remained. As exhaustion pulled her into unconsciousness, her final thought was bitter and unyielding. "At least I'll die out of the wind." A bone-shaking roar shattered the stillness, jolting Lara awake. Her heart raced as the ground trembled violently beneath her, sending a cascade of frost and debris raining down from the ceiling. The faint hum of engines grew louder, and suddenly a blinding light pierced the darkness, painting the cave walls in sharp, flickering shadows. She scrambled deeper into the cavern, her pulse thundering in her ears. Curiosity and fear warred within her. Crawling to the edge of the cave's entrance, she peered outside. What she saw made her breath hitch. A massive metal ship, its body mangled and smoking, lay embedded in the snow-covered hillside. Sparks flew from its broken hull, and pieces of debris littered the surrounding landscape. Then she saw them. They emerged from the wreckage, staggering figures silhouetted against the stark white snow. They walked on two legs, like her people, but their appearance was strange, alien. Their skin wasn't blue like hers, but came in shades of pink, brown, and pale tone. Their rounded ears and odd clothing marked them as something entirely different. Humans. Lara's heart froze. The stories her people told of humans were far from kind. They were predators, conquerors who took what they wanted without mercy. Yet, as she watched them move, disoriented and clearly unprepared for the brutal climate, another feeling crept into her chest: pity. They struggled against the wind, their faces twisted in pain and desperation. They were like her alone and fighting for survival. The urge to help them gnawed at her. She knew the dangers of exposing herself, but the sight of one of the humans, his hands trembling as he tried to lift a piece of fallen equipment, struck a chord in her. She couldn't watch them perish, not when she could offer a chance, however slim, at survival. Swallowing her fear, Lara stepped into the open, the icy wind tearing at her as if to drag her back. Her sin frame trembled as she approached the humans, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Hello," she said, her voice barely carrying over the wind. Her language was foreign to them, but she hoped the tone of her voice would convey her intention. "Do you need help?" The humans froze, their heads snapping toward her. One of them, a tall man with sharp features and gray eyes that seemed to pierce through her, stepped forward. His hand rested on a metallic object strapped to his side, a weapon, she guessed. "Who are you?" he barked, his language incomprehensible but the suspicion in his voice unmistakable. Lara swallowed hard, pointing toward the cave. "Shelter," she said, gesturing to the darkness behind her. The man's eyes narrowed as he studied her, the tension palpable. The other humans whispered among themselves, their words quick and cautious. Finally, the tall man gave a short nod and signaled his crew. Lara led the way back to the cave, her heart pounding with every step. She had invited strangers' predators into her sanctuary. Whether it was a mistake or the right decision, she didn't know. All she could do was hope. The humans followed Laura into the cave, their faces etched with exhaustion and weariness. The tall man, who introduced himself as Captain Alex Raymond, immediately began issuing orders in sharp, clipped tones. His crew moved quickly, setting up what little equipment they had salvaged from their wrecked ship. The cave became a flurry of activity, with voices echoing off the walls in a language Lara couldn't understand. Lara lingered near the entrance, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Doubts clawed at her mind. What have I done? These humans were unlike anyone she had known, taller, sturdier, and unpredictable. Her people's stories painted them as conquerors, but as she watched them now, fumbling with their supplies and shivering against the cold, she saw no malice, only desperation. A sudden clatter drew her attention. One of the humans, a woman with a determined expression, struggled to ignite a fire. The matches in her hands broke apart, useless in the damp air of the cave. Laura hesitated. Approaching them felt like a risk, but the sight of their trembling hands and pale faces tugged at her resolve. If she didn't act, they might not survive the night. Slowly, she moved toward them. The crew froze, their eyes darting to Captain Raymond, who gave her a silent, calculating nod. Laura crouched beside the fire pit and reached for a piece of bioluminescent fungus growing on the wall. The humans watched with a mix of suspicion and curiosity as she demonstrated how the glowing plant could burn brightly, its soft heat spreading warmth through the cave. A murmur ran through the group, and one of them, a red-haired woman with kind eyes, muttered something in a tone that felt like gratitude. For the first time, Lara saw something soften in their faces. They were still cautious, but their desperation outweighed their mistrust. As hours passed, the humans began to rely on her. She showed them how to line the cave entrance with the broad leaves of glacier plants to keep out the biting wind. Their engineer, a man named Cooper, seemed particularly interested in her methods. He sketched diagrams in a small notebook, his face alight with curiosity as she explained, using gestures and broken words, the properties of the local flora. Though they didn't share a common language, Lara felt an unspoken understanding begin to form between them. Still, Captain Raymond kept his distance. His piercing gray eyes followed her every move, his hand never far from the weapon at his hip. Lara didn't blame him. She was a stranger to them, and trust was a luxury they couldn't afford. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that, beneath his hardened exterior, he carried a burden she understood all too well, the weight of responsibility for others. By nightfall, the cave was transformed. The humans had insulated the walls, divided the space into sleeping areas, and salvaged enough heating units to create a central gathering spot. As they huddled around the faint warmth, Captain Raymond finally spoke to Lara directly, his tone firm but not unkind. "You know this planet," he said, his words slow as if to ensure she understood. "We need to call for help. Our communications are destroyed. Is there a way?" Lara hesitated. The question hung heavy in the air. Her knowledge of Argos's terrain was limited, but she remembered fragments of the old maps her people had studied before the evacuation. There had been a relay station in the mountains to the north, a remnant of her civilization's advanced technology. It might still work. "There is something," she said carefully, her voice halting as she searched for the words. "Old station, mountains. It might help." The captain's sharp gaze locked onto hers. "Can you take us there?" Her breath caught. The thought of venturing beyond the familiar terrain of the plains terrified her. The mountains were treacherous, their paths littered with hidden dangers, but as she looked around the cave at the humans, their faces lined with exhaustion and hope she knew she couldn't refuse. "Yes," she said finally, "I will take you." The team set out at dawn, their breath visible in the biting air. Captain Raymond led the way with a sense of purpose, his movements precise and deliberate. Cooper carried a pack of tools salvaged from the wreck, while Dr. Alara Chen, the ship's physician, walked beside Lara, her gentle demeanor a source of comfort amid the harsh landscape. The journey was grueling from the start. Snowdrifts rose like walls, forcing them to wade through knee-deep frost. The jagged cliffs loomed overhead, their icy surfaces glinting dangerously in the pale light. Lara moved ahead of the group, her sharp eyes scanning for safe paths. Her years of surviving alone on Argos gave her an edge, but even she found the journey daunting. "How far?" Cooper asked, his voice muffled by the scarf wrapped tightly around his face. Lara pointed to the distant peaks. 3 days. Dr. Chen offered a reassuring nod. We'll make it. Stay close, everyone. The second day brought a brutal storm that forced them to take shelter beneath an overhang. The wind screamed through the valleys, sending shards of ice flying through the air. Huddled together, the group shared what little food they had, their breaths fogging in the freezing air. Lara watched them quietly, marveling at their resilience. They fought exhaustion and fear with a determination that mirrored her own. By the third day, the terrain grew even harsher. The air was thin, and the biting cold seeped through their layers of clothing. Lara's legs burned with every step, but she pressed on, refusing to show weakness. She couldn't let them down, not after everything they had endured. Finally, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, they crested a ridge. Lara gasped, her heart leaping at the sight below. There it was, a massive, dish-shaped structure rising from the snow, its edges jagged with frost but still intact. A faint blue glow emanated from its center, a sign that some of its systems might still be operational. Cooper let out a low whistle. You weren't kidding. That's incredible. The group descended carefully, their movements cautious on the icy slope. When they reached the base of the station, its size was even more imposing. The towering structure loomed over them, a relic of a civilization long gone. Can you get us inside? Captain Raymond asked, his voice steady despite the tension. Cooper nodded, already unpacking his tools. Give me an hour. As the others prepared the area, Lara felt a strange unease settle over her. The station's faint hum seemed to vibrate through the air, stirring memories she had long buried. This place had once been a beacon of progress for her people. Now, it was a symbol of abandonment. She shook the thought away, focusing on the task at hand. Her journey with these humans had only just begun, and the challenges ahead would demand everything she had. The relay station stood as a silent sentinel against the icy wind, its massive dish towering above the snow-covered landscape. Cooper worked feverishly at the base of the structure, his gloved hands moving deftly over the ancient control panel. Sparks flew as he bypassed the rusted security systems, a testament to his skill and desperation. The rest of the team stood watch, their eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of danger. Lara couldn't shake the sense of unease that had settled over her. The faint hum emanating from the station seemed to vibrate through her bones, stirring memories she had tried to forget of her people's abandonment, their cold dismissal of her existence. Now, standing here with the humans, she felt the weight of their survival pressing down on her. They had trusted her to guide them, and she couldn't fail. Almost there, Cooper muttered, his breath fogging the air. This system's ancient, but it's not dead yet. Captain Raymond stood nearby, his weapon ready. He glanced at Lara, his gray eyes sharp. Anything we should know about this place? Any surprises? Lara hesitated, her gaze fixed on the faint glow emanating from the relay station's interior. Not. From the station, she said carefully. But the predators this place will draw them. As if on cue, a distant howl echoed through the mountains, low and menacing. Everyone froze. Captain Raymond's grip on his weapon tightened as he barked, "Stay sharp." Cooper, how much longer? Just a little more, Cooper replied, his voice tense. The howl was followed by another, closer this time. Lara's heart raced as shadows moved in the distance, slinking through the snow. The predators of Argos were relentless, their sleek forms adapted to the icy terrain. Red eyes glinted in the fading light, and their growls rumbled like an approaching storm. They're coming, Lara said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. Chen, cover Cooper, Raymond ordered. Lara with me. Dr. Chen positioned herself near Cooper, her weapon drawn. Mara followed Raymond to the edge of the platform, her sharp eyes scanning the darkening landscape. The predators emerged from the shadows, their jagged teeth bared as they crept closer. They were massive, their thick fur bristling against the cold wind. The first one lunged, its powerful body hurtling through the air. Raymond fired, the shot ringing out and striking the creature mid-leap. It fell with a pained snarl, but more were already closing in. Lara reacted on instinct, grabbing a jagged shard of ice and hurling it at another predator. It struck true, piercing the creature's flank and forcing it back. Good aim, Raymond said, his tone impressed despite the chaos. The fight was brutal and relentless. Lara moved with a precision born of survival, guiding the humans to use the terrain to their advantage. They worked as a unit, their actions synchronized despite the overwhelming odds. When one of the predators broke through their line, Dr. Chen stepped forward, her calm demeanor giving way to fierce determination as she fired a precise shot. Inside the station, Cooper's voice called out, "Got it. The system's online." The faint hum of the relay station grew louder as its dish began to rotate, aligning with the distant star. A green light blinked on the console, signaling that the transmission had begun. Laura's heart leapt with hope, but the battle outside was far from over. The predators seemed emboldened by the station's activity, their attacks growing more frenzied. One broke past Raymond's line of fire, its jaws snapping inches from Lara. She stumbled, falling into the snow as the beast loomed over her. In that moment, time seemed to slow. "Lara!" Raymond's voice cut through the chaos. A blur of motion followed, and Cooper appeared, slamming a metal pipe into the predator's side. It yelped and staggered back, giving Raymond the opening to take it down with a well-placed shot. Cooper reached out, pulling Lara to her feet. "You okay?" he asked, his voice breathless but steady. Lara nodded, her chest heaving. "Thank you." The tide began to turn as the team fought back with renewed vigor. One by one, the predators fell, their blood staining the snow. Finally, as the first rays of dawn broke over the mountains, the last of them retreated into the shadows, their howls fading into the distance. The group collapsed in exhaustion, their breaths visible in the cold morning air. Lara's body ached, but a sense of relief washed over her. They had survived. Inside the station, the console beeped, drawing their attention. Cooper leaned over the screen, his eyes scanning the readout. "We've got a response," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The rescue ship is coming." 2 weeks. A cheer erupted among the humans, their weary faces lighting up with joy. Lara stood apart, watching them with a faint smile. Yet a shadow of doubt lingered in her mind. What would happen to her once the ship arrived? Would they leave her behind as her people had? Later, as they prepared to leave the station, Dr. Chen approached her. "You were incredible out there," she said gently. "We couldn't have done this without you." Lara shook her head, her voice quiet. "I only did what I had to. You saved me too." Shen placed a hand on her shoulder, her expression warm. "We're a team now. Don't forget that." The words lingered in Lara's mind as they made their way back to the base camp. The mountains loomed behind them, but for the first time, Lara felt something unfamiliar, a flicker of hope. 2 weeks later, the rescue ship descended through the clouds, its sleek hull gleaming in the sunlight. As the humans loaded their supplies, Captain Raymond approached Lara. "You're coming with us," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Lara hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't belong with your people. Your world is not mine." Raymond's gaze softened. "You've proven yourself more than once. You belong with us now." Tears welled in Lara's eyes as she nodded. For so long she had been defined by rejection and loneliness. But now, as she stepped aboard the ship and looked back at Argos for the last time, she felt a surge of determination. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was starting anew with people who had become her family. The stars stretched out before them as the ship ascended, a new chapter waiting to unfold. The Obsidian spacecraft sliced through the void of space, its angular hull gleaming like a dark jewel against the backdrop of distant stars. Inside, Laura and Kira, two alien sisters from the planet Anzandar, sat in tense silence. Their sharp features mirrored their inner turmoil. Laura's emerald eyes burned with anger, while Kira's sapphire gaze carried a quiet determination. For them, this wasn't a mission. It was exile. "How could they do this to us?" Laura muttered, her voice a razor's edge. "We fought for them, defended their ideals, and this is our reward." Exiled to some primitive planet for daring to think differently. Kira, ever the calmer of the two, placed a hand on her sister's arm. "The High Council fears dissent, Laura. Unity is their strength, but also their weakness. We threatened that balance. And for what? Freedom?" Laura scoffed, her gaze locked on the blue and green orb growing larger in the viewport. "We'll find no freedom here, just savages." Kira's lips tightened, but she chose not to argue. Instead, she turned her attention to the swirling planet ahead. "Perhaps there's more to this world than you think. We don't know what awaits us, but maybe, just maybe, it's an opportunity." The ship jolted violently as it pierced Earth's atmosphere, streaking across the sky like a fiery comet. Below, Startled humans gazed upward, their faces filled with wonder and fear. But the deafening crash, the craft carved a deep trench into a grassy field on the outskirts of a sprawling city. Steam hissed as the ship's vents released pressure. The sisters stepped out, their metallic bodysuits shimmering in the sunlight. A crowd of humans had already gathered, some pointing, others recording the spectacle on their devices. Whispers and murmurs filled the air. Lyra surveyed the scene with disdain. "Look at them," she muttered, fumbling with their crude machines. "They stare as if we're gods. Or monsters," Kira murmured, her gaze sweeping the crowd. "Careful, Laura. This isn't Xander. We must tread lightly." The crowd parted as a convoy of military vehicles arrived, soldiers spilling out to form a perimeter. A tall man in a dark suit stepped forward, flanked by heavily armed guards. Despite his imposing presence, his expression betrayed awe and caution. "I am General Marcus Briggs," he announced, his voice steady. "On behalf of humanity, welcome to Earth." Laura's lip curled, but Kira inclined her head, her voice calm and melodic. "We are here, under circumstances beyond our control." Briggs hesitated, visibly unsettled by her words but impressed by her composure. "We'll ensure your safety and provide accommodations while we discuss matters further." Lara's jaw tightened, but she followed Kira as they were escorted into armored vehicles. The humans stared as the convoy drove away, their faces a mixture of curiosity and fear. The sisters were taken to a sterile military facility, its white walls and fluorescent lights a stark contrast to the organic elegance of Andarian architecture. Soldiers and scientists bustled about, their movements hurried, their gazes darting nervously toward the alien visitors. Lara and Kira were ushered into an interrogation room, where General Briggs sat waiting, his sharp eyes flicked between them as if trying to decipher their secrets. "So," he began, leaning forward, "you were exiled for what exactly?" "Thinking," Lara snapped, her tone cold. "On Xander, individuality is a threat. Conformity is their religion." Kira gave her sister a warning look before addressing Briggs. "Our society values unity above all else. But Laura and I, we believe there is strength in diversity. The High Council saw that as dangerous." Briggs nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "And your intentions here on Earth?" Kira hesitated, her usual composure faltering. "We don't know. Survival, perhaps." Understanding. Before Briggs could respond, the door opened, and two soldiers entered. Jake Smith, tall and broad-shouldered with piercing blue eyes, took up a position by the wall. Beside him stood Alex Donovan, wiry and sharp-eyed, his expression more analytical than wary. "These men will oversee your security," Briggs said, gesturing to the soldiers. "For your protection and ours." Laura's gaze flicked to Jake, her eyes narrowing. "Babysitters, how thoughtful." Jake smirked but said nothing while Alex studied the sisters with quiet intensity. After the interrogation, the sisters were led to their quarters, a small, Spartan room with two narrow beds and a single window. Laura flopped onto one of the beds, her frustration evident. "This is a prison," she muttered, staring at the ceiling. "And we're their prisoners." Kira sat on the edge of her bed, gazing out the window at the sprawling city beyond. "It's not what we're used to," she admitted. "But perhaps it's an opportunity to learn." Laura snorted. "Learn what? How to live like them." "They're nothing but savages." Later that evening, Kira wandered into the facility's library, her curiosity outweighing her caution. Rows of books and digital archives lined the walls, a testament to humanity's thirst for knowledge. She ran her fingers over the spines, marveling at the sheer diversity of subjects. Alex found her there, leaning casually against a shelf. "Fascinating, isn't it?" he said, breaking the silence. "For all our faults, humans have a knack for documenting everything." Kira glanced up, her sapphire eyes sparkling. "It's resourceful, ingenious even. On Xandar, knowledge is controlled. Here, it seems, free." Alex smiled, his admiration for her evident. "We make do with what we have." Meanwhile, in the training area, Laura worked off her frustration by sparring with a holographic opponent. Her movements were sharp, precise, and filled with barely contained rage. Jake watched from the sidelines, arms crossed. "You're good," he remarked as she disarmed the hologram with a final, fluid motion. "But you're holding back." Lara turned to him, her emerald eyes blazing. "I don't need your advice, human." Jake shrugged, unfazed. "Fair enough. But if you ever want a real challenge, let me know." Despite her irritation, Laura couldn't ignore the strange pull she felt toward Jake's unyielding confidence. He was infuriating yet intriguing. As the first night on Earth ended, the sisters found themselves at a crossroads. Lara's mistrust of humans clashed with her growing curiosity, while Kira's fascination with Earth's possibilities warred with the weight of their exile. Unbeknownst to them, their arrival had set events in motion that would challenge not only their beliefs, but the fragile connections they were beginning to form. The shadows of their past loomed closer, threatening to shatter the fragile peace they had found. The days that followed were tense, but transformative. The sterile halls of the military facility buzzed with activity as humans tried to decipher the mysteries of their alien guests. Meanwhile, Laura and Kira navigated an uneasy coexistence, both with their human hosts and with each other. Laura spent most of her time in the training area, a place where she could channel her frustration. Her sessions became a spectacle, with soldiers gathering to watch her unmatched agility and skill. Among them, Jake's gaze lingered longest. "You always this angry, or is it just Earth that brings it out of you?" Jake teased one morning after Laura dispatched another sparring partner, a holographic opponent tailored to match her skill. Lara's emerald eyes narrowed as she wiped sweat from her brow. "Anger is a survival tool. Maybe you should try it." Jake smirked, leaning against the wall. "You might find survival easier if you let someone have your back." Lara scoffed, but something about his words unsettled her. She hated how he challenged her assumptions, yet she found herself wondering if there was truth in his confidence. Meanwhile, Kira immersed herself in Earth science archives, her thirst for knowledge drawing her closer to Alex. His quiet demeanor and insightful questions made him a surprising companion. "One thing I've noticed about your people," Kira said during one of their late-night discussions in the library, "you thrive in chaos. Xandarian society is built on control, but here, creativity seems to come from the unknown." Alex nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Humans have always been good at finding order in the chaos, or at least pretending to." Kira's sapphire eyes softened as she studied him. "It's remarkable." "Your people's imperfections are oddly inspiring." Their exchanges became a nightly ritual, each conversation peeling back another layer of curiosity and admiration. But even as Kira and Alex grew closer, a shadow of guilt hung over her. She couldn't forget the purpose of their exile or the looming consequences of forming bonds with humans. Despite their growing connections, tensions between the sisters simmered. Lara, ever distrustful of the humans, saw Kira's openness as a dangerous vulnerability. "You're letting them get too close," Lara said one evening, her tone sharp. "Don't forget why we're here. These people are not our allies." Kira turned away from the window, her voice calm but firm. "Maybe they're not our enemies either. Have you considered that?" Laura's frustration boiled over. "We're Xandarians, Kira. We don't belong here, and we never will." "Don't let a few kind words blind you to the truth." Kira held her sister's gaze, her sapphire eyes steady. "Perhaps you're the one who's blind, Laura. Not everyone is like the High Council. These humans, they have something our people lost long ago: compassion, hope." Their argument ended in tense silence, neither willing to concede their perspective. But as Kira watched Laura retreat into her solitude, a pang of sadness settled in her chest. She knew her sister's anger was rooted in fear, a fear Kira herself felt but couldn't let rule her. Unbeknownst to the sisters, their arrival had not gone unnoticed by the Xandarian High Council. Through intercepted communications, the humans discovered that an elite team of Xandarian enforcers had been dispatched to Earth. Their mission: to eliminate the sisters and anyone aiding them. General Briggs summoned Laura and Kira to his office, his expression grim. "We've picked up transmissions from your home planet," he said, sliding a tablet across the table. "They're sending a strike team. Their orders are clear. You're to be neutralized." Laura's jaw tightened as she scanned the data. "So they couldn't handle us thinking differently, and now they want us dead." Typical. Kira's heart sank, her gaze flickering to the humans in the room. "If they come, your people will be caught in the crossfire." Briggs nodded solemnly. "We're preparing defenses, but their technology is beyond anything we've faced. If you have any insights, now's the time to share." Laura leaned back, crossing her arms. "You expect us to help you?" After keeping us locked in here like prisoners, Kira placed a calming hand on her sister's arm. "Laura, enough. If we don't work with them, we're all doomed." Reluctantly, Laura agreed, but her mistrust lingered. She couldn't shake the feeling that the humans had their own agenda, one that might not align with the sisters' survival. As preparations for the inevitable confrontation began, the relationships between the sisters and their human counterparts deepened and were tested. Lara and Jake often sparred together, their interactions a mix of sharp words and unspoken understanding. One evening, after a particularly intense session, Jake broke the silence. "You're not just angry at them," he said, his piercing blue eyes meeting hers. "You're angry at yourself." Laura froze, his words cutting deeper than she expected. "You don't know anything about me." Jake stepped closer, his voice softer. "Maybe not, but I know what it's like to carry that weight. You don't have to bear it alone." For once, Laura didn't respond with a biting retort. Instead, she turned away, her heart conflicted in a way she couldn't fully understand. Meanwhile, Kira and Alex worked tirelessly to adapt human defenses to counter Exandarian tactics. Late one night, as they reviewed schematics in the dimly lit library, Alex hesitated before speaking. "You know, I never thought I'd meet someone like you," he admitted, his voice almost a whisper. "Someone who sees the world the way you do." Kira looked up, her sapphire eyes filled with quiet warmth. "And I never thought I'd find someone on this world who makes me feel less alone." Their connection, though unspoken, grew stronger with every shared moment. But as the looming threat of the Exandarian strike team grew closer, so did the weight of their uncertain future. As the facility prepared for the coming attack, a fragile peace settled over its occupants. Lara and Kira stood on the roof one evening, gazing at the stars. "You're quiet," Kira said, breaking the silence. "That's not like you," Lara sighed, her emerald eyes reflecting the distant lights. I just, I don't know what we're doing here anymore. Fighting for humans. It feels wrong." Kira placed a hand on her sister's shoulder. "Maybe it feels wrong because it's new, but that doesn't mean it's not worth it." Lara glanced at her, her expression softening. "You always see the best in everything." "I don't know how you do it," Kira smiled faintly. "Because if I didn't, who would?" For a brief moment, the sisters found solace in each other's presence. But the stars above offered no answers, only the silent promise of the battles yet to come. In the shadows of the facility, danger loomed closer. The Exandarian enforcers were coming, and with them the sisters' fragile bonds with humanity would be tested in ways they could never have imagined. The night air hung heavy with tension, the facility's once bustling corridors now silent. Soldiers stood at their posts, their faces taut with anticipation. The Andarian enforcers were closing in, their arrival heralding an inevitable clash of civilizations. Laura and Kira stood side by side in the command center, watching the satellite feed of approaching alien ships. The sisters had traded their metallic bodysuits for battle gear provided by the humans, blending Exandarian technology with Earth's rudimentary designs. "They'll hit hard and fast," Lara said, her voice low but steady. "We need to be ready." General Briggs stepped forward, his demeanor grim. "What's our best chance?" Kira studied the tactical display, her sapphire eyes scanning the holographic projections. "They'll target your power grid first to disable communications. If we set a trap there, we might thin their numbers." Laura crossed her arms, her gaze locked on the general. "And we'll handle the rest. They're not just coming for us, they're coming for your world. Fight like your lives depend on it." "Because they do," Briggs nodded, the weight of the situation etched into his features. "Then let's get to work." The first strike came at midnight, a series of blinding explosions that lit up the sky. Xandarian ships descended like predatory birds, their sleek forms glinting in the moonlight. The ground trembled as energy blasts tore through the facility's defenses. Laura and Jake fought on the front lines, their movements perfectly synchronized. Despite their initial animosity, they had developed an unspoken rhythm, each instinctively covering the other. "Behind you!" Jake shouted, firing his rifle at an advancing Xandarian soldier. Laura spun, dispatching the enemy with a fluid motion. "Keep up, human," she called over her shoulder, a hint of a grin breaking through her usual intensity. Jake smirked, adrenaline fueling his every move. "Try not to get yourself killed." Alien. Across the battlefield, Kira and Alex worked to outmaneuver the Exandarian forces at the power station. Kira's knowledge of her people's tactics proved invaluable, while Alex's ingenuity turned Earth's limited resources into effective weapons. "They're flanking," Kira warned, pointing to a group of soldiers advancing from the south. Alex nodded, quickly rigging a makeshift explosive. This should slow them down. As the explosion rocked the area, Kira couldn't help but admire his resourcefulness. For someone with primitive tools, you're surprisingly effective, Alex grinned, wiping sweat from his brow. High praise coming from you. Despite their efforts, the Exandarian forces pressed on, their numbers overwhelming. The facility became a chaotic battleground, filled with the sounds of laser fire, explosions, and shouted orders. The sisters found themselves cornered near the central courtyard, surrounded by Xandarian enforcers. Jake and Alex fought desperately to hold the line, but the odds were stacked against them. "We're outnumbered," Jake shouted, his weapon running low on energy. "Any brilliant ideas?" Laura's emerald eyes blazed with determination. "We don't run. We end this here." Kira glanced at her sister, her voice steady despite the chaos. Together, Jake and Alex exchanged a look, their resolve hardening. "We're with you," Alex said, his voice unwavering. In the heart of the chaos, the four of them became an unbreakable unit, their differences forgotten in the face of a common enemy. Each move was precise, each action driven by the trust they had built. Laura shielded Jake from a deadly blast, her combat instincts saving his life. "You owe me," she said with a smirk, pulling him to his feet. "Add it to the list," Jake replied, his grin defiant. Meanwhile, Alex and Kira worked in perfect harmony, their combined efforts neutralizing wave after wave of attackers. As Alex dispatched an enemy soldier, he turned to Kira. "You okay?" Kira nodded, her sapphire eyes glowing with determination. "I've never been more sure of anything." As the battle raged on, the Exandarian commander, a towering figure clad in gleaming armor, stepped forward, his presence commanding the battlefield. His voice boomed through a translator. "Laura and Kira of Xandar, surrender now, and your allies will be spared." Laura clenched her fists, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We'll never bow to the Council's cowardice. Not again." The commander raised his weapon, his gaze cold. "Then you will fall." Before he could fire, Kira stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Wait. If you truly believe in the Council's unity, then let's end this without more bloodshed." "A duel me against you." Lara's eyes widened. "Kira, no." Kira placed a hand on her sister's shoulder, her expression resolute. "It's the only way." The commander laughed, a cruel sound. "Very well, but your death will change nothing." The two faced off in the courtyard, the battlefield falling silent. Kira's movements were graceful but precise, her knowledge of Xandarian combat giving her an edge. The duel was fierce, each strike met with equal force. As the fight reached its climax, Kira exploited a weakness in the commander's stance, disarming him with a swift maneuver. She held her weapon at his throat, her voice unwavering. "Call off your forces. Now." The commander hesitated, his pride clashing with the reality of his defeat. Finally, he raised a hand, signaling a retreat. The Exandarian forces pulled back, their ships retreating into the night sky. As the first light of dawn broke over the battlefield, the facility lay in ruins, but its defenders stood victorious. Soldiers cheered, their exhaustion momentarily forgotten. Lara and Kira stood together, their bodies battered but their spirits unbroken. Jake and Alex approached, their expressions a mix of relief and pride. "You did it," Jake said, his voice filled with admiration. Lara glanced at him, a rare softness in her gaze. "We did it." Kira turned to Alex, her sapphire eyes glistening. "Thank you for believing in us." Alex smiled, his voice steady. "You didn't need our belief. You had the strength all along." The sisters sent a final message to Xander, a declaration of their defiance. They would no longer bow to the Council's oppressive rule. Instead, they would carve their own paths, guided by the bonds they had forged on Earth. The story ended with the four of them standing together, the horizon bathed in golden light. Despite the battles yet to come, they knew they would face them side by side, bound by trust, resilience, and the hope for a brighter future. The neon-soaked streets of Neo-Tokyo pulsed with life as Jethro Kumar maneuvered his hoverbike through the maze of traffic. The city's towering skyscrapers reflected an endless stream of holographic advertisements, casting vibrant blues and greens across the evening crowd. Despite the dazzling display of progress, Jethro felt detached, as if he were an outsider observing a world that no longer held meaning for him. As a biotech engineer, he'd once been filled with ambition, but years of corporate monotony had dulled his excitement. Each day felt like a rerun of the last, predictable, endless, and unremarkable. Tonight, however, something was different. A sharp chime from his comlink jolted him from his reverie. Glancing at his retinal display, Jethro noticed an unfamiliar code blinking insistently. Spam calls weren't unusual, but something about this code demanded his attention. Mr. Jethro Kumar, a crisp, artificial voice greeted him. Speaking, Jethro replied warily, pulling his bike into a quiet corner to avoid the bustling noise of the streets. This is an automated message from the Intergalactic Notary Office, the voice continued. We regret to inform you that Xander Zorn of Zeta 9 has passed away. You are listed as the sole beneficiary of his estate. Please report to Orbital Station Alpha for further details. Jethro froze, his mind racing. Xander Zorn? His old friend from the Intergalactic Science Conference 5 years ago. The alien had been a larger-than-life figure, brilliant, eccentric, and unpredictable. They'd bonded over a shared love of quantum algorithms and Centurion whiskey, but their paths had diverged shortly after. I don't understand, Jethro stammered. Why would Xander leave anything to me? The AI's voice remained emotionless. Further details will be provided at the orbital station. Failure to claim the estate within one interstellar cycle will result in reversion to secondary beneficiaries. The line went dead. For a moment, Jethro sat in stunned silence. The cacophony of Neo-Tokyo faded into the background as questions flooded his mind. Why him? What estate? And most importantly, what had happened to Xander? That night, Jethro barely slept. By dawn, he had packed a bag, submitted his leave of absence, and booked a ticket to Orbital Station Alpha. The shuttle ride was a blur of apprehension and curiosity. As the station came into view, a massive wheel of carbon fiber brilliance floating against the black void of space, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change forever. Upon arrival, a holographic assistant guided him through the sterile corridors, its voice polite but detached. They stopped before an ornate door that felt out of place amid the station's cold, utilitarian design. Mr. Kumar, the hologram announced, please enter. The room beyond was a striking contrast to the rest of the station. Polished mahogany shelves lined the walls, and an antique desk stood at its center. Behind it sat a mass of tentacles encased in an exosuit that vaguely resembled a humanoid torso. Two eye stalks swiveled toward Jethro as he entered. Ah, Mr. Kumar, the being said, its voice melodious and oddly calming. I am Notary Zix. Please have a seat. Jethro perched uneasily on the leather chair, feeling as if he'd stepped into an interstellar fever dream. I don't understand. And Xander and I were friends, but we hadn't spoken in years. Why would he leave me anything? Zix's tentacles rippled slightly, a gesture Jethro interpreted as a shrug. Mr. Zorn's motives are not for me to speculate. I am here only to execute his final wishes. A sleek data pad slid across the desk toward him. Please place your palm here to initiate the transfer. What exactly am I inheriting? Jethro asked, hesitating. His hand hovered above the pad. Zix listed the assets with detached precision. A luxurious space mansion orbiting Zeta 9, 12 merchant-class starships, various investments across 3 star systems, and the eye stalk swiveled toward the door. Ah, here she is now. The door slid open, and Jethro's breath caught. A woman stepped into the room with an otherworldly grace, her shimmering skin reflecting a kaleidoscope of iridescent colors. Her silver eyes locked onto his, and for a moment it felt as though the air had been sucked from the room. Mr. Kumar, Zix continued, this is Neela, Mr. Zorn's wife. She is also part of your inheritance. Jethro bolted upright. Wait, people can't be inherited. That's slavery. A soft melodic laugh filled the room, catching him off guard. Neela spoke, her voice smooth and lilting like wind chimes on a summer breeze. You misunderstand, Jethro Kumar. I am not property. By the customs of my people, I am now bound to you as your wife. Jethro's mind reeled. This is insane. I can't. I don't even know you. Neela tilted her head slightly, her expression serene but curious. And yet you find me attractive, do you not? His face burned as he stumbled over his words. That's not the point, Zix interjected smoothly. Time is of the essence, Mr. Kumar. Xander's rivals are already aware of his passing and will contest the estate if you do not assume control immediately. And if I refuse? Jethro asked, his voice strained. Then the estate will be tied up in intergalactic courts for decades. Mr. Zorn's empire will collapse, and his work will be lost. Jethro looked at Neela again. Despite her ethereal beauty, there was something deeper in her silver eyes, intelligence, vulnerability, and perhaps even resolve. Is this what you want? He asked her softly. What I want is irrelevant, she replied, her voice steady. This is my duty. Taking a deep breath, Jethro placed his palm on the datapad. The transfer completed with a soft chime, and a heavy weight seemed to settle on his shoulders. Congratulations, Zik said. You are now Mr. Zorn's official heir. I wish you luck, Mr. Kumar. You will need it. As he followed Neela out of the office, Jethro couldn't shake the feeling that he had just stepped into a world far beyond his comprehension, and there was no turning back. The space mansion orbited Zeta 9 in silent majesty, its crystalline domes catching the twin suns' light and scattering prismatic hues across the planet below. Jethro stood on the observation deck, staring out at the planet's surface, his mind heavy with questions. The weight of the inheritance of Xander's empire, Neela's presence, and the unexplained rivalry with Zorg pressed down on him like an anchor. This is surreal, he muttered under his breath. Neela's voice broke the silence. Surreal or not, it is your reality now. Jethro turned to see her standing at the doorway, her shimmering skin catching the light in a way that made her seem otherworldly. Despite her calm demeanor, her silver eyes betrayed a flicker of uncertainty. You've been standing here for hours, she said softly. I'm trying to figure out why Xander chose me for all of this, Jethro replied. I wasn't special to him. We were friends, sure, but this, he gestured toward the mansion and the endless void beyond the observation window. This feels like a mistake. Neela walked closer, her movements graceful and measured. Xander believed in potential. He often spoke of your unique ability to see solutions where others saw problems. Perhaps that's what he saw in you, a mind that could carry forward what he left behind. Jethro let out a bitter laugh. Potential? I'm a glorified desk jockey back on Earth. Xander was a genius. I'm just me. Before Neela could respond, a sharp tone echoed through the room. The mansion's AI chimed, its mechanical voice cutting through the air. Incoming transmission. Jethro frowned. Who could be calling? The wall panel flickered to life, and Zorg's face appeared, his green, chitinous skin glistening under artificial light. A sneer twisted his lips as his glowing yellow eyes locked onto Jethro. Ah, the new lord of the Zorn estate, Zorg said, his voice dripping with mockery. Tell me, little human, are you enjoying your stolen inheritance? Jethro felt a rush of anger but kept his voice steady. It's not stolen. Xander left it to me, legally. Zorg let out a low, gravelly laugh. Legality is a fragile thing in this galaxy. Let's see how long you hold on to it when your resources dry up and your allies abandon you. The screen went dark, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Jethro turned to Neela, his jaw clenched. That doesn't sound like an empty threat. It isn't, Neela replied, her tone grave. Zorg has already begun spreading false claims about you. He'll move swiftly to discredit you and take what he believes is his. Jethro's resolve hardened. If he wants to fight, he'll get one. But first, we need to figure out what Xander was working on. This isn't just about money or property. There's something bigger here. Neela nodded. Follow me. There's a vault beneath the mansion. It contains Xander's most guarded secrets. The two descended through the mansion's labyrinthine corridors, finally arriving at a reinforced door. Neela placed her hand on a scanner, and the door slid open with a hiss, revealing a room filled with glowing data crystals, holographic displays, and intricate schematics. This is Xander's legacy, Neela said. His research lab. Jethro began exploring the data, marveling at the intricate designs and calculations. As he delved deeper, he uncovered blueprints for a device labeled Empathic Amplifier. Its purpose, to enhance telepathic and empathic abilities, allowing species to communicate on a profound emotional level. This is incredible, Jethro said, awe coloring his voice. If this works, it could revolutionize diplomacy, prevent wars before they even start. Neela's expression darkened. Or it could be weaponized. In the wrong hands, this device could control minds, sow chaos, and destroy entire civilizations. Zorg must know about this. Before Jethro could respond, the mansion's AI interrupted. Alert! Intruders detected in Sector 4. Jethro's heart raced. Zorg, likely, Neela said, closing her eyes as her telepathic abilities reached out. 5 mercenaries. They're headed for the data vault. Jethro grabbed a plasma rifle from the wall. Stay here. I'll handle this. No, Neela said firmly. I can sense their movements. Together, we stand a better chance. The two moved through the corridors, Neela guiding Jethro with her telepathic insights. They worked in perfect sync, using surprise and precision to outmaneuver the intruders. Jethro's technical knowledge helped disable their equipment, while Neela's illusions confused and disoriented them. Within minutes, the threat was neutralized, but the victory felt hollow. This was just a test, Jethro said, his voice tinged with frustration. Zorg's testing our defenses, and he'll escalate, Neela added. We need to move the amplifier. It's too dangerous to keep here, Jethro nodded. Then we find somewhere safer. But first, we need to learn everything Exander knew about this device. Zorg can't win. The two prepared for their next move, knowing that their fight with Zorg was far from over. The hidden research station loomed before them, its exterior camouflaged as an asteroid drifting silently in Zeta 9's orbit. As Jethro guided the ship into the docking bay, a sense of foreboding settled over him. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint hum of the ship's engines. This is where Xander hid his most sensitive projects, Neela said, her voice calm but tense. If Zorg knows about this place, we're walking into a trap. Jethro tightened his grip on the controls. Then let's hope he's underestimated us. The station's interior was cold and dark, the dim lighting casting long shadows across the walls. They moved cautiously through the corridors, guided by the faint signals Neela sensed from Xander's amplifier. When they reached the central lab, Jethro's breath caught. The amplifier stood at the room's center, its design a masterpiece of interlocking crystals and pulsating conduits. Energy rippled across its surface, casting ethereal patterns on the walls. This is it, Jethro whispered, approaching the device, the empathic amplifier. Xander's legacy. Before he could inspect it further, the sound of footsteps echoed through the corridor. Jethro and Neela turned as Zorg strode into the room, flanked by heavily armed mercenaries. His sneer was as sharp as the claws protruding from his hands. Well, well, Zorg said mockingly, I should thank you, Kumar. You've saved me the trouble of searching for the prize. Jethro stepped forward, placing himself between Zorg and the amplifier. This isn't yours, Zorg. Xander didn't want you anywhere near it. Zorg laughed, the sound echoing coldly. Xander was a dreamer, and dreamers don't last long in this galaxy. Power belongs to those willing to take it. He signaled his men to advance, but before they could act, Neela stepped forward. Her silver eyes glowed faintly as she raised a hand. This device wasn't meant for destruction, Zorg. Do you think you can twist its purpose without consequence? Zorg's sneer faltered, but only for a moment. You think words will stop me? He turned to his men. Take them. Chaos erupted. Jethro and Neela fought side by side, their teamwork seamless. Neela's telepathic abilities created illusions that disoriented the mercenaries, while Jethro used his technical expertise to disable their weapons and deploy improvised defenses. Despite their efforts, Zorg reached the amplifier and activated it. A surge of energy filled the room, knocking Jethro to his knees. The device pulsed violently, its power growing uncontrollably. Neela screamed, her hands clutching her head as the amplifier amplified her telepathic link to overwhelming levels. I can stop it, Neela yelled, her voice strained. But I need your help. Jethro crawled to her side, his hand finding hers. What do I need to do? Focus, she said, her voice trembling. Our minds must align. We need to counter the amplifier's energy together. Jethro closed his eyes, letting Neela's presence guide him. For the first time, he felt her thoughts, her emotions a torrent of fear, hope, and determination. Their connection deepened, and together they pushed back against the amplifier's power. The energy began to subside, the device's glow fading. Zorg roared in frustration, lunging toward them, but Jethro acted quickly. Grabbing a discarded weapon, he fired, forcing Zorg to retreat. This isn't over, Zorg snarled, his yellow eyes blazing. You've made an enemy of me, Kumar. I'll hunt you to the edges of the galaxy. Jethro stood firm, his gaze unyielding. Then you better be ready to lose. Zorg fled with his remaining men, leaving Jethro and Neela alone in the now quiet lab. The amplifier, though deactivated, remained a symbol of both promise and danger. "We can't leave it intact," Jethro said, his voice steady. "Zord will come back for it." Neela nodded. "Then we destroy it." Xander's vision was noble, but its risks are too great. Together, they dismantled the amplifier, piece by piece. As they worked, Jethro couldn't help but reflect on how far they had come. This wasn't just about Xander's legacy anymore. It was about building something new, something their own. The bridge of the Horizon Seeker hummed softly as Jethro stared out at the vast expanse of space. Beside him, Neela stood with her usual calm poise, her silver eyes focused on the massive station ahead. Named Zorn's Legacy, the station was a hub of intergalactic diplomacy, a testament to Xander's dream of unity and understanding. Alien species from across the galaxy worked and studied there, learning to bridge their differences through empathy and collaboration. Jethro's reflection caught his eye in the viewport. His once dark hair was now streaked with gray, and faint lines crinkled around his eyes. Despite the challenges of the past 5 years, he felt stronger, more purposeful. "You've done well," Neela said, her voice soft but filled with pride. "We've done well," Jethro corrected, turning to her. "I couldn't have done this without you." Neela smiled, her expression warm. "And I couldn't have done it without you." Jethro took her hand, their bond stronger than ever. "Ready to change the galaxy again?" "Always," she replied, her voice filled with certainty. Together they stepped into the future, their journey far from over but filled with hope, love, and purpose. The twin suns hung mercilessly in the sky, their unrelenting heat baking the golden sands of the desert into a shimmering, shifting inferno. Jiren trudged forward, the weight of his scavenger's pack and the oppressive heat pushing him to his limits. The brim of his battered hat shielded his face, but the blazing light seemed to pierce through every layer, turning the world into a blinding haze. He stopped atop a towering dune, his sharp eyes scanning the horizon. This planet unforgiving and unnamed was home only to the desperate. For Jiren and the settlers clinging to survival in their makeshift domes, it wasn't home by choice. It was a prison of circumstance. Far below, the wreckage of a mining shuttle lay sprawled across the dunes, its twisted metal carcass half buried in the sand. Jiren squinted, disappointment etching deeper lines into his weathered face. He had hoped to find untouched salvage, something overlooked in the settlers' frenzied raids. But the remnants glinted dully, stripped of anything valuable. Cursing under his breath, he adjusted his pack and prepared to head back. The settlement's domes, patched together with scavenged scraps, were barely visible through the sweltering haze. But as he turned, something caught his eye. A glint, a flicker of light that didn't belong to the wreckage or the endless expanse of sand. Jiren froze, instincts honed by years in this wasteland kicking in. Mirages were common here, cruel tricks of the twin suns, but this was no illusion. The shimmer held an unnatural quality, an otherworldly brilliance. His pulse quickened, curiosity battling caution as he descended the dune. Each step sank his boots deeper into the scorching sand, but he pressed on, drawn by the inexplicable glow. At the base of the dune, the anomaly took form. Jiren stopped in his tracks, his breath catching in his throat. A figure lay motionless on the sand, partially obscured by the swirling grains. It was a woman or something resembling one. Her elongated form shimmered with a strange iridescence, her skin shifting between hues of violet and silver. Long hair, dark as the void, spilled across the sand, glistening as though woven with threads of starlight. Even in the stillness of death or perhaps sleep, she radiated an unsettling grace. She didn't belong here. Jiren approached cautiously, his hand hovering near the dagger at his waist. His shadow fell over her, but her serene features remained untouched by the desert's cruelty. There was no sweat on her skin, no signs of the harsh elements that defined this world. "Who are you?" he whispered, his voice nearly drowned out by the whispering wind. Her eyes snapped open. Vivid violet light pierced through him, freezing him in place. Images flooded his mind towers of crystalline beauty, skies painted with impossible colors, and beings of breathtaking grace moving in harmony. The visions overwhelmed him, leaving his knees weak. Then her voice, soft yet commanding, echoed in his mind. "Zanira." Jiren staggered back, his head spinning. Whatever this being was, she was no ordinary survivor. She was something beyond his understanding, a force he couldn't ignore. The air around her hummed faintly, and Jiren realized with a chill that it wasn't just the desert playing tricks on him. This woman Zanira was alive, and her very presence was altering the world around her. Steeling himself, Jiren reached out a tentative hand. "Can you walk?" he asked, his voice firmer this time. Zanira sat up slowly, her movements deliberate. Her glowing eyes locked onto his, unreadable and ancient. Then, without a word, she rose to her feet, her stature imposing yet delicate. As they began the long trek back to the settlement, Jiren couldn't shake the feeling that his life and perhaps the fate of this barren world had just changed forever. The settlement loomed ahead, a stark contrast to the endless dunes. A cluster of patched domes and makeshift towers, its survival depended on the grit of its inhabitants. The settlers, hardened by years of struggle, viewed outsiders with suspicion, and Zanira wasn't just an outsider. As they crossed into the settlement, activity ground to a halt. Men and women paused in their tasks, their weathered faces etched with wariness. Whispers spread like wildfire, eyes darting toward Zanira's shimmering figure. The stark sunlight only amplified her alien beauty, her skin glinting with iridescent hues that defied explanation. "What's this?" a sharp voice barked, cutting through the murmurs. Jiren turned to see Vorn striding toward them, his broad frame and scarred face exuding authority. He was the de facto leader here, a man whose pragmatism bordered on ruthlessness. His calculating eyes swept over Zanira, narrowing with interest. "She's not from here," Jiren said, his voice steady despite the tension. "No kidding," Warren replied, his tone laced with sarcasm. "Where did you find her? And more importantly, why did you bring her here?" "She needs help," Jiren answered firmly. "Help?" Vorn's laugh was cold, his gaze fixed on Zanira like she was a valuable piece of salvage. "She doesn't look like she needs help. She looks expensive." The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. The settlers traded in scraps and trinkets, their survival reliant on off-world traders who paid handsomely for rare finds. To Vorn, Zanira wasn't a person, she was an opportunity. "She's not for sale," Jiren said, his voice hardening. "Everything here has a price." Jiren, Vorn shot back. "You know that," the crowd murmured, unease rippling through the settlement. Zanira remained silent, her glowing violet eyes scanning the crowd with an unsettling calm. The air seemed to grow heavier, an almost imperceptible hum radiating from her presence. "What is she?" Vorn demanded, his voice rising. "And what trouble have you dragged into our midst?" "She's not trouble," Jiren replied, surprising even himself with the conviction in his voice. "She's different." "Different," Vorn sneered. "Different gets us killed out here." Before Jiren could respond, the ground beneath them trembled. A faint vibration at first, it quickly grew into a rumble that sent sand cascading from the domes. The settlers froze, their eyes wide with fear. "What the hell was that?" Vorn growled, his hand instinctively moving to the knife at his belt. Jiren turned to Zanira, whose gaze had shifted to the horizon. Her glowing eyes narrowed, the faint hum around her intensifying. "They're coming," she said softly, her voice calm but laced with a quiet urgency. "Who?" Jiren asked, his stomach tightening. "The ones who hunt me." The sky darkened, the twin suns dimming as shadows stretched across the desert. Far off in the distance, dark shapes began to emerge, their movements unnaturally precise. "They're not human," Jiren muttered, his voice barely audible over the rising wind. "No, the rising wind. No," Zanira confirmed, her tone steady. "They are hunters, sent to capture me or destroy me." The air grew heavier, charged with an oppressive energy that made Jiren's skin prickle. The settlers scrambled to prepare, but their fear was palpable. Weapons were drawn, though they seemed pitifully inadequate against the looming threat. "You've brought hell to us, Jiren," Vorn snarled, his voice shaking with anger, "and now we all pay the price." Jiren ignored him, turning to Zanira. "Can you stop them?" She hesitated, the glow in her eyes dimming for a moment. "If I fight, this place may not survive." "My power, it's not stable here." "Then we fight together," Jiren said, gripping his blade tightly. Zanira's gaze softened slightly, a flicker of something almost like gratitude crossing her features. "You don't understand what you're offering," she said quietly. "Maybe not," Jiren replied, his voice firm. "But I won't stand by and watch them take you." The hunters drew closer, their shadowy forms now fully visible. Cloaked in dark, shifting armor, they moved with an eerie precision, their weapons glowing with a faint, menacing light. Zanira stepped forward, her presence commanding. The ground beneath her feet seemed to ripple, the air around her shimmering with a raw, otherworldly energy. "They won't stop," she said, her voice carrying an unspoken weight. "Not until one of us is gone." The first blast came without warning, a bolt of crimson energy tearing through the air and striking one of the domes. The structure collapsed in an explosion of sand and debris, the settlers scattering in panic. Jiren stood his ground, his pulse hammering in his chest. Beside him, Zanira raised a hand, and the very fabric of the desert seemed to bend to her will. Sand rose in spiraling waves, swirling around the settlement like a living barrier. For the first time, Jiren saw the full extent of her power, and it terrified him. "Stay close," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. As the hunters closed in, the line between survival and annihilation blurred. Jiren knew one thing for certain: the battle for Zanira's freedom and their lives had only just begun. The first explosion shook the ground, sending a cloud of debris skyward. The hunters had arrived, their dark forms silhouetted against the dimming light of the twin suns. Their weapons hummed ominously, arcs of crimson energy slicing through the air and striking the settlement with pinpoint accuracy. Jiren gritted his teeth, his blade in hand, though it felt woefully inadequate. Zanira stood at his side, her presence like an anchor amidst the chaos. The air around her shimmered with an almost unbearable energy, and the faint glow in her violet eyes began to intensify. "You can't fight them alone," Jiren shouted, his voice barely audible over the roar of the blasts. "I don't intend to," Zanira replied, her tone calm but resolute. She raised a hand, and the desert itself responded. The sands writhed like a living thing, rising in spiraling waves that shielded the settlement from the hunters' assault. The hunters hesitated, their weapons faltering against the unexpected resistance. But they regrouped quickly, their leader a towering figure cloaked in shifting shadows stepping forward. Its voice echoed through the settlement, cold and devoid of emotion. "Princess Zanira," it said, the disdain in its tone palpable. "Your defiance is futile. Surrender, and we will spare these insignificant creatures." Zanira's expression hardened. "You will not take me," she declared, her voice carrying an authority that seemed to reverberate through the very ground. The leader raised a hand, and a surge of crimson energy burst forth, slicing through Zanira's shield of sand. The settlers screamed as another dome collapsed, scattering debris across the settlement. Jiren lunged forward, gripping his blade tightly. "We can't just stand here," he shouted, turning to the settlers. "Help me fight them." But the settlers were frozen in fear, their weapons clutched uselessly in their hands. Only Vorn stepped forward, his face pale but determined. "This is madness," he growled, "but I'll be damned if I let them destroy everything." Before Jiren could respond, Zanira stepped between them and the advancing hunters. Her body glowed brighter, the air around her crackling with raw power. She extended both hands, and a shockwave erupted from her, hurling the nearest hunters back into the dunes. But the strain showed. Her movements slowed, and her breaths came in short, shallow gasps. The shimmering glow of her skin began to flicker. "Zanira, stop," Jiren shouted, rushing to her side. "You're pushing too hard. They will not stop," she replied, her voice steady despite the visible toll, "and neither can I." The hunter leader raised its staff again, and this time the energy it unleashed was devastating, a searing blast that tore through the sandstorm, heading straight for Zanira. Jiren didn't think. He acted. With a cry, he threw himself in front of her, the force of the blast slamming into him and knocking him to the ground. Pain coursed through his body, but he gritted his teeth and pushed himself up. "You're not doing this alone," he said, his voice hoarse but unwavering. Zanira looked at him, her glowing eyes softening. For a brief moment, her expression wasn't one of an alien princess or a powerful being. It was one of gratitude, almost human. The hunter leader stepped forward, its shadowy form towering over them. "You cannot win," it sneered. "Your power is unstable and your allies are weak." "This ends now." Zanira straightened, her body trembling, but her resolve unbroken. "You are right," she said, her voice steady. "It does end now." She raised her hands, and the desert responded in kind. The sands erupted in a violent storm, spiraling into a vortex of light and fury. The hunters faltered, their weapons useless against the raw, unbridled power Zanira unleashed. But Jiren saw the cost. Her shimmering skin dimmed further, her movements growing weaker with each passing second. She was pouring everything she had into this final act, knowing it would leave her with nothing. Zanira, stop, he pleaded, his voice breaking. Yule, she turned to him, her glowing eyes meeting his. Live, she whispered, her voice soft yet commanding. Live and remember. With one final surge of power, Zanira unleashed a wave of light that swept across the battlefield, consuming the hunters and their leader in an instant. The storm subsided, leaving the desert eerily still, and Zanira was gone. Jiren knelt in the sand, his body aching and his mind reeling. In his hand, he clutched a shard of violet crystal, faintly pulsing with the energy she had left behind. The settlers emerged slowly, their faces etched with a mixture of relief and sorrow. Vorn approached, his usual bravado replaced by a rare solemnity. She was more than we deserved, he said quietly. Jiren didn't reply. His gaze remained fixed on the horizon, where the twin suns were beginning to rise. Somewhere out there, he believed, Zanira's essence lingered, woven into the fabric of the desert itself. As he stood, the shard in his hand pulsed faintly, a reminder of her sacrifice and a promise that her memory would endure. And with that, Jiren turned toward the settlement, ready to rebuild and honor the legacy of the alien princess who had given everything to protect them.